The conference room fell silent when Vice President Richard Brennan said I was too feminine to represent the company in front of international investors. I had spent 3 years developing a neural processing patent that could revolution Azirdic intelligence systems. I worked weekends while my colleagues went home to their families. I skipped gym sessions and dinner dates to perfect every technical specification. I built something that no one else in the company could replicate. But none of that mattered when Richard stood up during the executive meeting and told the board that investors feel more comfortable with someone more masculine leading the patent presentation. The room stayed quiet. Nobody defended me. My team leader looked down at his papers. Richard smiled and suggested they bring in Marcus from marketing, someone with no technical background, but with what he called the right image. I smiled back at him and said nothing. That silence cost them $1.1 billion. My name is Cameron Mitchell, and I never thought my career would end because of how I spoke or moved my hands when explaining complex algorithms. For years, I believed that talent and hard work were enough. I arrived early every morning to review patent applications and stayed late running simulations. But then Richard Brennan made his comment in front of 12 executives, and I realized that some people would always see my identity before my achievement. One more thing. If you have ever been or felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who has gone through this, the story will touch you. You'll want to follow it to the end. Subscribe and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. I started working at Neural Tech Systems 5 years ago as a junior patent engineer. The company specialized in artificial intelligence hardware and software solutions for Fortune 500 clients. My job was to research existing patents, identify gaps in the market, and develop new intellectual property that could give the company a competitive advantage. It was technical work that required understanding both engineering principles and legal frameworks. Most people in the office found it boring. I loved every minute of it. The office was located in a glass tower in downtown Seattle. Modern furniture, standing desks, and expensive coffee machines created an atmosphere of innovation. The company employed about 200 people across different departments. Engineering teams worked on the third floor. Sales and marketing occupied the fifth. Executives had the entire seventh floor with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. I spent most of my time on the third floor, surrounded by server racks and whiteboards covered in technical diagrams. My direct supervisor was Todd Freeman, a man in his late 40s who had been with the company since its founding. Todd was fair but distant. He gave me projects and expected results without much guidance. I appreciated the autonomy. It allowed me to work in my own way, following research threads that interested me without constant supervision. But it also meant I had little protection when things went wrong. The engineering team consisted of 12 people. Most were men in their 30s and 40s. There were 2 women, both junior developers, who kept to themselves. People were generally polite, but not warm. They would say good morning and ask about weekend plans, but conversations rarely went deeper than surface pleasantries. I noticed small things. The way conversations would pause when I joined a group at the coffee machine. How certain colleagues would avoid making eye contact during meetings. Nobody said anything directly hostile, but the coldness was clear. Michael Chen was the exception. He was a senior hardware engineer who had joined the company around the same time as me. We became friends over lunch breaks, discussing everything from patent law to science fiction novels. Michael never seemed bothered by who I was. He treated me like any other colleague, which felt rare and valuable. Sometimes we would grab dinner after work at a Thai restaurant near the office. Those moments of normal friendship meant more than I usually admitted to myself. Themicroagressans started small. During my second year, I presented a patent concept in a team meeting. I explained the technical specifications, the market opportunity, and the competitive advantages. When I finished, Richard Brennan, who was director of business development at the time, made a comment about my presentation style. He said I was very expressive with my hands and maybe I should try to be more still and controlled when speaking. Everyone laughed. It seemed like a joke, but the message was clear. The way I naturally communicated was somehow wrong or unprofessional. Another time, I was excluded from a major client meeting. Todd told me the client was very conservative and they wanted to send a different team. He did not explain why I was not suitable, but I understood. My colleague Brad attended instead, even though he knew far less about the project than I did. The client meeting went well, and Brad received praise. I stayed in the office and continued working on technical documents that nobody would present to anyone. I learned to anticipate these moments. When important visitors came to the office, I would stay at my desk and avoid common areas. When executives discussed team assignments, I would prepare myself for disappointment. I developed a kind of professional invisibility, making myself useful, but not too visible, competent, but not threatening. It was exhausting to constantly monitor my own behavior, to second guess every word and gesture, to wonder if being myself was somehow damaging my career. My family did not understand. My parents lived in Ohio and thought I had a great job at a tech company. They bragged to their friends about their son, the engineer in Seattle. I never told them about the small humiliations, the passed over promotions, the feeling of being tolerated rather than valued. What would be the point? They could not change anything, and it would only worry them. 3 years into my job, I started working on something significant. I was reviewing patents related to neural processing units when I noticed a fundamental inefficiency in how existing systems handled parallel computations. Every major tech company was racing to develop faster AI processors, but they were losing variations of the same basic architecture. I saw a different approach. Instead of trying to make existing designs faster, I developed a completely new processing framework that could handle exponentially more data with significantly less energy consumption. I spent 8 months developing the concept. I ran simulations, built mathematical models, and wrote hundreds of pages of technical documentation. I worked nights and weekends. I stopped going to the gym. I canceled social plans. Everything focused on this one project because I knew it could be transformative, not just for the company, but for the entire artificial intelligence industry. This was the kind of innovation that could define careers and generate enormous revenue for decades. During this period, I met Daniel. He worked as a financial analyst at a different tech company. We met at a professional networking event that I almost skipped because I was so focused on my patent work. Daniel was smart, funny, and completely outside the world of engineering and patents. We started dating. For the first time in years, I had something in my life besides work. Someone who saw me as a whole person, not just as a set of technical skills or a target for professional prejudice. Daniel would come to my apartment after work and find me surrounded by papers and laptop screens. He would order food and make me take breaks. He listened when I talked about neural processing architectures, even though he admitted he understood maybe 10% of what I said. Having him in my life made the difficult parts of work more bearable. When I felt invisible at the office, Daniel reminded me that I was real and valuable and deserving of respect. I finally completed the patent application in March. The documentation was 347 pages. It covered every technical detail, every potential application, every defensive claim against competitors. I submitted it to Todd with a memo explaining why this could be a game-changing asset for neural tech systems. Then I waited. Patent reviews usually took 2 to 3 weeks. This one took 6. Nobody said anything. I kept working on other projects and wondering if anyone had even read what I submitted. Then, in early May, Todd called me into his office. He looked excited, something I had rarely seen from him. He told me that he had shared my patent with the executive team, and they were incredibly impressed. Richard Brennan, who had been promoted to vice president, wanted to meet with me personally to discuss the patent and its commercial potential. Todd said this could be huge for the company and for my career. I felt something I had not felt in years working there. Hope. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I prepared a presentation that translated the complex technical concepts into business terms that executives could understand. I practiced my delivery, trying to be clear and confident without being too expressive or animated. I wanted this to go perfectly. I wanted them to see the value of what I had created without any distractions or prejudices getting in the way. For once, I wanted my work to speak louder than their assumptions about who I was. The executive presentation took place in the large conference room on the 7th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A long marble table seated 16 people. Richard Brennan sat at the head of the table. Todd was there along with the chief technology officer, the chief financial officer, and several other senior executives I recognized but had never spoken to. I felt nervous but prepared. This was my moment to show what I could do. I started my presentation by explaining the current limitations of neural processing technology. I showed graphs comparing energy consumption, processing speed, and computational capacity across all major competitors. Then I introduced my patent, explaining how the new architecture solved problems that other companies had not even recognized yet. I walked them through potential applications, artificial intelligence systems, autonomous vehicles, medical diagnostic tools, financial modeling platforms. The revenue opportunities were massive. Every major tech company would want to license this technology or acquire it outright. The executives listened carefully. The CFO asked questions about manufacturing costs. The CDO wanted to know about implementation timelines. I answered everything clearly and thoroughly. I felt good. I felt like I was finally being seen for my actual abilities. Then Richard Brennan started speaking. He said the patent was indeed impressive. He said I had done excellent work, and the company was lucky to have such a talented engineer. I started to relax. But then his tone changed. Richard said that while the patent itself was valuable, the company needed to think carefully about how to present it to potential licensors and investors. He said that major corporations and venture capital firms had certain expectations about who they wanted to work with. He said that perception mattered as much as substance in business. He looked directly at me and said that I was very talented technically, but perhaps not the right person to be the public face of this patent. He said I came across as too soft to delicate, too feminine to represent neural tech in high-stakes negotiations. The room went quiet. Nobody moved. Richard continued speaking. He said they needed someone with more gravitas, someone who could command respect in boardrooms, someone who fit the image that investors expected from a tech company. He suggested bringing in Marcus Webb from the marketing department. Marcus had no technical background, but Richard said he had the right presence and communication style. Richard said I could stay on as a technical advisor, working behind the scenes, while Marcus handled all external presentations and negotiations. I felt my face getting hot. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Todd looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The CDO examined his phone. The CFO wrote notes on a pad of paper. Nobody defended me. Nobody said this was inappropriate or unfair. They just sat there in silence, letting Richard Brennan strip away my achievement and replace me with someone more acceptable, someone more masculine, someone who looked like what they thought success should look like. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that Marcus knew nothing about neural processing or patent law. I could have said that my appearance and mannerisms had nothing to do with my ability to explain complex technology to investors. I could have called this what it was, discrimination based on who I was rather than what I could do. But I knew none of that would matter. I knew that if I pushed back, they would see me as difficult or emotional or unprofessional. So I smiled. I said that whatever the company thought was best. I said I was happy to support the project in any capacity. Richard looked pleased. He said he knew I would understand. The meeting ended. People filed out of the conference room. A few executives nodded at me as they passed. Todd touched my shoulder and said we would discuss details later. I stood alone in that expensive conference room with its view of the city, and I felt completely hollow. I had built Something Extradian. I had sacrificed my time, my health, my personal life to create intellectual property that could generate billions of dollars. And it did not matter because I did not fit their image of what a successful person should look like. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on other work. Michael Chen found me an hour later. He had heard about the meeting through office gossip. He was angry. He said what Richard did was illegal and discriminatory. He said I should report it to Human Resources or even consider legal action. I told him it would not help. It would just make my life harder and probably cost me my job. Michael argued, but eventually stopped when he saw I was not going to change my mind. He was a good friend, but he did not understand. He had never had to calculate whether standing up for himself would destroy his career. The next 10 days were strange. Marcus Webb started attending meetings about my patent. He was a confident man in his early 30s who wore expensive suits and spoke in the kind of smooth corporate language that executives loved. He knew almost nothing about the actual technology. In meetings, he would ask me to explain concepts, and then he would repeat what I said in slightly different words, taking credit for the ideas. People praised his communication skills and strategic thinking. My name started appearing less in project documents and emails. During this time, Daniel noticed I was struggling. I would come home exhausted and defeated. He would ask what was wrong, and I would try to explain the slow erasure happening at work, how my patent was being taken from me, how I was becoming invisible while someone else stepped into the recognition I deserved. Daniel listened and held me and told me I deserved better. He said I should look for a new job, somewhere that would value me properly. But I was not ready to give up yet. I had spent 5 years at this company. I had created something revolutionary. I was not going to just walk away. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel told me about his company. He worked at Quantum Dynamics, a smaller tech firm that was trying to break into the artificial intelligence market. They were struggling to compete with bigger companies that had more resources and better technology. Daniel mentioned this casually over dinner one night, not thinking much of it. But I started thinking. I started thinking very carefully about options I had not considered before. I still had all my research. Every simulation, every technical specification, every line of code. The patent application was filed under my name as the inventor. Neuraltech owned the commercial rights because I developed it as an employee, but the intellectual understanding belonged to me. I knew this technology better than anyone else in the world. Marcus could pretend to understand it in presentations, but he could never actually recreate it or explain how it truly worked. I started having lunch with Daniel more often. I asked casual questions about quantum dynamics. What were they working on? Who were their investors? What was their long-term strategy? Daniel thought I was just being interested in his work. I did not realize I was gathering information, looking for an opportunity, planning something that would change everything. 14 days after Richard Brennan called me too feminine, everything accelerated. Neuraltech scheduled presentations with 3 major potential licensors: an automotive manufacturer interested in autonomous vehicle systems, a healthcare company developing AI diagnostic tools, and a defense contractor working on military applications. Each presentation could lead to licensing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus Webb was scheduled to lead all 3 presentations. My role was listed as technical support, available to answer detailed questions if needed. I spent long hours preparing materials for Marcus. I created simplified presentations that explained the complex technology in terms he could understand and repeat. I wrote talking points and anticipated questions. I essentially did all of the intellectual work while Marcus practiced his delivery and made sure his suits were properly tailored. It was humiliating, but I kept smiling. I kept being helpful and cooperative and professional. The first presentation went well. The automotive executives were impressed. They asked technical questions and Marcus would look at me. I would answer clearly and concisely. Marcus would then rephrase what I said and the executives would nod appreciatively at his explanation. After the meeting, Richard Brennan congratulated Marcus on his excellent performance. Nobody mentioned my contribution. During this period, my relationship with Daniel was suffering. I was working 12 to 14-hour days. I canceled dinner plans and weekend trips. I was physically present but mentally absent, always thinking about patents and presentations and corporate politics. Daniel tried to be understanding, but I could see his frustration. We had been together for less than a year, and already my career was consuming everything. One night, Daniel said we needed to talk. He said he felt like he was dating a ghost. He said he understood my work was important, but he needed to know if I had any space left for us. I broke down. I told him everything about the humiliation in the conference room, about watching Marcus take credit for my work, about feeling embarrassed and diminished despite creating something extraordinary. Daniel held me while I cried. It was the first time I had let myself fully feel the anger and hurt I had been suppressing. Daniel said something that night that changed everything. He said I did not owe Neuraltech anything. He said they had already shown they did not value me. He said maybe it was time to stop helping people who would never respect me. Then he mentioned that Quantum Dynamics was actively looking for breakthrough technologies to license or acquire. He said their CEO was frustrated with always being 2 steps behind bigger competitors. He said they had venture capital funding and were willing to make aggressive moves to establish themselves in the AI market. I started thinking seriously about alternatives. The patent was filed in my name as inventor. Neuraltech owned the commercial rights, but there were complexities. When I developed the technology, I used company resources and company time. But I also did substantial work from home on my personal computer, using my own research and ideas. The boundaries were not as clear as Richard Brennan probably assumed. And there was another factor. I had developed improvements to the original patent that were not included in the company filing. I had continued refining the technology on my own time, creating enhancements that were arguably separate intellectual property. I consulted with a patent attorney, someone outside the company who specialized in intellectual property disputes. I explained my situation carefully without revealing too many specifics. The attorney told me that ownership questions could be complicated. If I had developed significant improvements independently, outside of work hours and without companion sources, I might have legitimate claim to that separate intellectual property. The attorney warned me that this was risky and could lead to legal battles. But it was possible. 3 weeks before the final major presentation, everything fell apart. I arrived at the office early one morning and found an email from Human Resources. They wanted to meet with me immediately. I went to the HR office on the 6th floor. The director of Human Resources, a woman named Patricia Morris, was there along with Richard Brennan and Todd Freeman. Patricia told me to sit down. She said they had been reviewing my recent work performance. She said there were concerns about my attitude and commitment to team goals. I was confused. I had been working harder than ever. I had prepared all the materials for Marcus. I had answered every question and met every deadline. What performance issues could they possibly have identified? Richard spoke next. He said I seemed resentful about the decision to have Marcus lead the presentation. He said other team members had reported that I was being passive-aggressive and undermining Marcus's authority. He said the company needed team players who supported management decisions without creating negative energy. None of this was true. I had been nothing but professional and helpful, but I realized what was happening. They were building a case to remove me. They wanted to push me out before the big licensing deals close so they would not have to share credit or compensation with me. They wanted to erase my contribution completely, making it seem like Marcus had been the driving force behind Thepatent all along. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. Patricia said they were putting me on a performance improvement plan. I had 30 days to demonstrate better attitude and teamwork. If I failed to improve, they would terminate my employment. Todd looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Richard smiled slightly. They were all waiting for me to react, to get angry or defensive or emotional. I did not give them the satisfaction. I said I understood and would work hard to address their concerns. Then I left the office and went back to my desk. I called Daniel during lunch. I told him what happened. He was furious. He wanted me to quit immediately. But I told him I had a better idea. I asked if he could arrange a meeting between me and the CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Daniel was surprised, but said he would try. 2 days later, I had a meeting scheduled with Jennifer Park, the founder and chief executive of Quantum Dynamics. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near Quantum Dynamics headquarters. Jennifer was a woman in her mid 40s who had started her company 5 years ago after leaving a major tech corporation. She understood corporate politics and the challenges of competing against bigger players. I explained my situation carefully. I told her about the neural processing patent and the improvements I had developed independently. I told her about the discrimination and the performance improvement plan. I told her I was looking for a company that would value innovation over image. Jennifer listened carefully. She asked detailed questions about the technology and its potential applications. I explained everything clearly, showing her simulations and technical documents I had brought on my personal laptop. She was impressed. She said Quantum Dynamics would be very interested in acquiring or licensing this technology. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted fair compensation, proper recognition, and the chance to work somewhere that respected me. She said they could make that happen. Over the next 4 days, Jennifer and her legal team worked at lightning speed. They reviewed all my documentation proving that the improvements to the neural processing architecture were developed independently. They verified that I had used my own equipment and my own time for this work. They structured an acquisition deal that would give Quantum Dynamics exclusive rights to the enhanced technology. The price was $1.1 billion. I would receive 20% as the inventor, plus a senior position at Quantum Dynamics with full benefits and equity. During this time, I continued working at Neuraltech as if nothing was happening. I attended meetings. I supported Marcus in his presentations. I followed my performance improvement plan. Richard Brennan seemed satisfied that he had broken me into compliance. He had no idea what was coming. Daniel was my anchor through all of this. He reminded me why I was doing this when I felt scared or uncertain. He celebrated each step forward in the negotiations with Quantum Dynamics. He told me I was brave and strong and deserving of success. Our relationship grew stronger because we were building something together, fighting against injustice together. I realized I loved him, not just because he supported me, but because he saw me completely and loved what he saw. The final major presentation was scheduled for a Thursday. Marcus spent the entire week before practicing his delivery. I helped him, providing answers to likely questions and making sure he understood the key points. He was confident and excited. Richard Brennan walked around the office talking about how this presentation would establish Neuraltech as a leader in AI technology. Nobody mentioned my name. I had become invisible. Exactly what they wanted. On Tuesday, 2 days before the presentation, I submitted my resignation to Human Resources. I gave no explanation, just a simple letter stating my last day would be Friday. Patricia Morris called me into her office and asked if this was related the performance improvement plan. I said no, I had simply received a better opportunity elsewhere. She accepted my resignation and said they would process my final paycheck. I cleaned out my desk that evening, taking only personal items and leaving behind 5 years of work and humiliation. On Wednesday, Quantum Dynamics announced their acquisition of revolutionary neural processing technology. The press release described the capabilities and potential applications. It mentioned my name as the lead inventor and new chief technology advisor at Quantum Dynamics. Within an hour, the tech industry news sites picked up the story. By Wednesday afternoon, it was the top story in business news. A $1.1 billion acquisition of breakthrough AI technology. Richard Brennan tried to call me 17 times that day. I did not answer. Todd Freeman sent me urgent emails asking what was happening. I did not respond. Neuraltech's legal team contacted Quantum Dynamics claiming ownership of the technology. Jennifer Park's lawyers responded with detailed documentation proving that the acquired technology was separate from the original company patent. They had every simulation, every line of code, every timestamp showing independent development. Neuraltech had no legal claim. I went home Wednesday evening and Daniel was waiting with champagne. We did not drink it. We just held each other and I cried again. But this time, the tears were different. They were relief and vindication and the release of years of swallowed pride. Daniel told me he was proud of me. He said I had fought back in the smartest possible way. I had not gotten angry or emotional or vindictive. I had simply taken what was mine and left them with nothing. The aftermath unfolded quickly and brutally for Neuraltech Systems. By Thursday morning, their stock price had dropped 18%. Investors were panicking because the company had spent months promoting their revolutionary AI technology to potential licensors. They had scheduled presentations and signed preliminary agreements based on capabilities they no longer possessed. The enhanced neural processing architecture that Quantum Dynamics now owned was significantly superior to the basic patent that Neuraltech still held. Without those improvements, their technology was merely competitive, not transformative. The automotive manufacturer that had been negotiating a $300 million licensing deal canceled their contract. They released a statement saying they were now in discussions with Quantum Dynamics instead. The healthcare company did the same. Within 48 hours, Neuraltech had lost over $800 million in projected licensing revenue. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Richard Brennan tried to do damage control, claiming they still had valuable intellectual property. But industry analysts were already writing articles explaining how Neuraltech had mismanaged a brilliant engineer and lost their most valuable asset. I started at Quantum Dynamics the following Monday. My new office was on the executive floor with windows overlooking Lake Washington. Jennifer Park introduced me to the engineering team and explained that I would be leading the development and implementation of the neural processing technology. People treated me with respect and genuine interest. Nobody commented on my mannerisms or suggested I change my presentation style. They cared about what I knew and what I could do. It felt strange at first, that absence of constant judgment. I realized how much energy I had been spending just trying to be acceptable at Neuraltech. Daniel and I celebrated properly that weekend. We went to a nice restaurant and actually enjoyed ourselves without the weight of workplace discrimination cushions me. He told me that watching me fight back had made him love me. He said he admired my patience and strategic thinking. I told him I could not have done it without his support and encouragement. We talked about the future, about building a life together, about all the possibilities that felt real now instead of impossible. The legal consequences for Neuraltech continued escalating. Several investors filed lawsuits claiming the company had misrepresented the status of their intellectual property. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into whether executives had made false statements about company assets. Richard Brennan hired an expensive legal team. The company hired crisis management consultants. Nothing stopped the collapse. Marcus Webb was fired 2 weeks after I left. The company could not justify his salary when he had no actual technical skills and the project he supposedly led no longer existed. He tried to find work at other tech companies, but word had spread about what happened. Everyone in the industry knew he had been a figurehead taking credit for someone else's work. His career was effectively over. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. He was just a tool that Richard Brennan had used. The real architect of the disaster was Richard himself. Todd Freeman reached out to me in early October. He sent a personal email to my new address at Quantum Dynamics. He apologized for not defending me in that conference room. He said he had been a coward and he regretted it. He said he should have stood up to Richard Brennan and supported me. I appreciated the apology, but I did not respond. Todd had made his choice when it mattered. His regret now did not change anything. Richard Brennan faced the worst consequences. The board of directors forced him to resign in November. They released a statement saying his leadership decisions had resulted in catastrophic losses for the company. Several news articles investigated his history and found patterns of discrimination and poor judgment. His reputation in the tech industry was destroyed. He would not work as an executive again. The man who had called me too feminine to represent the company was now unemployable himself. Neuraltech Systems never recovered. They tried to pivot to other technologies, but investors had lost confidence. The company was eventually acquired by a larger corporation for a fraction of its previous value. Most employees lost their jobs. The beautiful glass tower office in downtown Seattle was emptied and leased to a different company. Everything Richard Brennan had built collapsed because he valued appearance over substance, prejudice over performance. Quantum dynamics thrived. The neural processing technology I developed became the foundation for multiple product lines. We licensed it to automotive companies, healthcare providers, financial institutions, and government agencies. Revenue in the first year exceeded $2 billion. Jennifer Park credited me publicly and frequently for the company's success. My compensation and equity made me wealthy beyond anything I had imagined. But more valuable than the money was the respect and recognition I received. I hired Michael Chen to join my team at Quantum Dynamics. He had stayed at Neuraltech after I left, but he was unhappy watching the company self-destruct. He accepted my offer immediately. Having him there made the new environment even better. We worked together developing next-generation improvements to the neural processing architecture. We published papers and spoke at industry conferences. People listened when we talked because they respected our expertise. Daniel and I moved in Together in December. We found a house in the suburbs with a large backyard and space for a home office. Living together felt natural and right. We balanced each other well. He kept me grounded when work consumed too much of my attention. I encouraged him to pursue career goals he had been afraid to attempt. We built a life that was ours, free from the toxic environment that had nearly broken me. I occasionally saw news about former Neuraltech executives. Richard Brennan tried to start a consulting business, but it failed quickly. Marcus Webb moved to a different city and took a job in sales. Todd Freeman found work at a smaller company in a lower position than he had held before. Their careers had all suffered permanent damage because they participated in or enabled discrimination. The consequences were not instant, but they were real. The tech industry took notice of what happened. Several companies revised their discrimination policies and sensitivity training programs. Journalists wrote articles about the business cost of prejudice, using Neuraltech as a case study in how bias destroys value. I gave a few interviews talking about my experience, not for revenge, but to help other people facing similar situations. I wanted them to know that they did not have to accept mistreatment, that their talent and work had value regardless of how others perceived their identity. Jennifer Park nominated me for several industry awards. I won recognition as an innovator and leader in artificial intelligence technology. Standing on stages accepting awards, giving speeches about technical breakthroughs, I thought about that conference room where Richard Brennan had called me to feminine. I thought about how small he had tried to make me feel. And I smiled because I had proven that my value was never determined by his prejudice. I had taken everything he tried to steal and built something better than he could have imagined. Quantum Dynamics expanded internationally. We opened offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore. I traveled frequently for presentations and technical consultations. Nobody ever suggested I was too soft or too delicate or too feminine for these responsibilities. They valued my expertise and trusted my judgment. I represented the company at the highest levels and did it successfully, proving what I had always known. Competence has nothing to do with conforming to someone else's narrow ideas about how a person should look or act or be. The most satisfying moment came 2 years after I left Neuraltech. Quantum Dynamics was invited to present at an international artificial intelligence conference. The keynote speech focused on breakthrough technologies that were reshaping the industry. I was on stage explaining the neural processing architecture to an audience of 3,000 people, including executives, investors, researchers, and journalists. And sitting in the audience, I saw Richard Brennan. He had paid for a ticket like everyone else. He was watching me receive the recognition he had tried to deny me. Our eyes met for a moment. He looked away first. I continued my presentation without missing a beat. That was all the revenge I needed. Simply being successful, being myself, being exactly who I always was while achieving everything he said I could not. Looking back now, 3 years after leaving Neuraltech, I understand that the discrimination I faced was never about my abilities or qualifications. It was about other people's insecurities and prejudices. They could not imagine that someone like me could be brilliant, could be valuable, could be worth billions of dollars. Their failure of imagination became my opportunity. I learned that silence can be strategic, that patience can be powerful, that the best response to people who try to diminish you is to build something they cannot ignore or destroy. I learned that finding people who truly see you and support you, like Daniel and Jennifer and Michael, matters more than winning approval from people who will never respect you. I learned that my identity is not a weakness or a liability. It is simply who I am. And who I am was always enough. More than enough. Worth fighting for. Worth protecting. Worth $1.1 billion and a future I built on my own terms. The people who tried to erase me are forgotten now. But the technology I created will shape the world for decades. That is the difference between trying to fit in and refusing to be anything less than yourself. If my story inspired you, if you have ever felt diminished or know someone who has been, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Here, we share real stories of overcoming and resistance. And if you have your own story of triumph against prejudice, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire someone who is going through a similar situation. Remember, your value is not defined by the prejudice of others. Your talent is greater than any barrier they try to put in your way. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being who you are without apologizing. Thank you for watching, and until the next story, which will be even more impactful.